Bitcoin is winning without Wall Street. Yes, it's good that they're here. Yes, it's good that we have MicroStrategy, that we have BlackRock and all of those things, but we do not need them because Bitcoin is winning without them. And it shows that Bitcoin is a grassroots movement from the bottom up. The plebs, we are the strong backbone of Bitcoin. We are the ones that make Trump and all the institutions adopt Bitcoin in the first place. This is what I talked today about with Frank Corva, one of my favorite guests. He recently was a White House correspondent for the Bitcoin magazine, seeing Trump behind the scenes and telling today hilarious stories about him and his politics inside the White House. And yes, he also has a very interesting perspective on the Samra case and even a specific date when he thinks it might be that they will be actually pardoned by Trump. So this was a packed episode with Frank, one of my favorite guests. So enjoy. I think the last time we talked about White House correspondence, the whole thing with Trump, this was like really the prime time for all those political topics. Yep. And I want to get to that a little bit later, but also I think what's interesting is how Bitcoin is actually being adopted, how you also mentioned of we kind of lose sight of what's actually going on the grassroots level of Bitcoin, where we talk every week of like how many Bitcoin strategy bought and then what Trump said, and then actually this is just like a few highlights, and then there's a lot of development actually happening in like Nigeria or Ghana or like wherever in the world. How do you see it currently, and what are you kind of seeing in the Bitcoin development world?
Yeah, I think this is really important to highlight. And I'll be honest, while I was doing the White House correspondence gig, I was very much trying to stay in my lane to make sure that I was giving the best sort of, I would say, political and legal coverage, because I was also covering the Samurai and Tornado Cash cases as I was doing the White House work. People tend to gravitate to certain journalists, content creators, whatever it is, because they have a sort of maybe a specialty, if you will. And that was my specialty for the time being. But there was this sort of part of me deep down that was a little bit unfulfilled, and that I really, really love covering Bitcoin adoption around the world. Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, but even parts of Europe, all over the world. I enjoy kind of seeing how people are adopting it differently, how different technology is being created to remedy different issues in different parts of the world. I recently wrote a piece for Forbes on a village in Ghana. It's a part of Ghana called Agbozume. It's it's on the east side of Ghana, about right by the water or by the coast, and by the border of Togo. There's a Bitcoin community there called Bitcoin Dua. I'm actually forgetting off the top of my head what Dua means in the local language, but they, Kofi, the founder of this project of Bitcoin Dua, has been working incredibly hard to educate people. I was actually there on the technical first day of the opening of the project. I was in Ghana for the African Bitcoin Conference, or the Africa Bitcoin Conference in 2023. I went to this village. I saw what they were building. At the time, I don't even think they had chairs in the room yet, but now they have computers, and they're not only teaching Bitcoin, but they're teaching coding. They're doing amazing work. Kofi, the year later in Kenya, at the next Africa Bitcoin Conference, he won the Social Impact Award. He had an amazing impact within that first year. And then I think Jack and the team from Block, like Jack Dorsey, just came in with, I think it's somewhere between a half a Bitcoin and a full Bitcoin to help begin the funding of a sports complex that they're building in that area. And that complex will ideally become self-sustaining. It'll be a place for where they're actually going to teach about Bitcoin as well, but for younger people from the high school through 20s to compete. And so there's this amazing link, and I've seen this, I've been to 5 of the circular economies now. There's this amazing link between community, people who are really good at community development, and Bitcoin. Because I think with Bitcoin, despite the fact that we use the phrase "don't trust, verify," which is important, there is some level of trust when you're first learning about it, right? You're like, is this person teaching me about a scam? What is this thing? You have to trust the person who's telling you about this to some degree, even if it's just to sort of spark your interest. So Kofi has been a community organizer there for 20 years. So I think people were like, okay, if you say so, I'll give this thing a shot. And it's really turned this village around. And then another thing, we were just talking a little bit off camera about this. I just published a piece yesterday for Forbes on more female developers coming to Bitcoin. And I'm not doing it to be woke or anything else. I've spoken with many female developers. They just want to be judged by the quality of their code, but they do find it a little bit more difficult to get their foot in the door to start working on certain projects, whether it's Bitcoin Core itself or different either implementations of Bitcoin or different Bitcoin apps or projects. What I focused on there was a project called Bitcoin Data, which is, Data Devs. Bitcoin Data was started a few years ago by a woman named Lorraine Marcel, who I think may have been on your show. I'm not positive, but yeah. So educating African women about Bitcoin, and there's specific reasons she focuses on that. Aside from being an African woman, they deal with a unique set of problems that she addresses. And she now started a program for developers, people who want to become developers in the Bitcoin space, and they're getting jobs outside of it. So it's this untold story in Bitcoin. It's not just the banking the unbanked, or maybe like providing some sort of better money to those who have been traditionally financially disenfranchised. It's giving them actual job opportunities. Similar with Kofi, there's a gentleman from Bitcoin Dua who has created something called Bitspenda. Bitspenda it's like, I call it a lightning to fiat gateway. You could spend your Bitcoin and then it settles on the mobile money network in Ghana. I think it's called Momo in Ghana. So it's like, if you want to live on a Bitcoin standard, that's great. You don't need all the shopkeepers to do it. You're going to spend from your Lightning wallet on the back end of what Bright has created. You're having it transferred over to the fiat network that it's going to settle on. It settles on fiat. Everybody's happy. Shopkeeper gets their fiat. Well, we don't know if they're happy. Fiat makes people sad, but at the very least, the Bitcoiner can spend their Bitcoin and live on a Bitcoin standard if they want to. So I do have to say, while I on some level I miss some of the White House reporting for sure. It has been really, really great to go back to what I believe is sort of the heart of the Bitcoin mission, which is to bring people into the fold, to empower people via this technology. And it goes far beyond them using the technology, but also seeing their skills come out and their ability to get a job, to get hired by an international company, to get brought into the whole really Bitcoin space ecosystem. This is, to me, one of the most exciting things happening in the world today on any frontier.
Yeah, I think this is this general thing between either is it bottom up or top down, and I think this bottom up grassroots movement is so important, and is all the real adoptions in Bitcoin actually started. I mean, even all top downs originated from grassroots, from bottom up. Eventually, totally. El Salvador, also Donald Trump being pro crypto, pro Bitcoin, is only because he saw that much support, that much voter and also donor power behind it, and it's like, oh yeah, like, okay, it seems to be a very important topic. So I think this bottom up it often gets like not the power that it deserves. We talk a lot about those big figures, and it makes sense, because like those are kind of the signs that we are entering kind of mainstream when like a Donald Trump, a Grant Cardone, a Michael Saylor comes into Bitcoin. But they are coming into Bitcoin because of that bottom-up adoption, because there are people coding it, there are people that are actually adopting it, that are fighting for medium of exchange and all of those things, which I think is often overlooked, that the bottom-up is kind of enabling the top-down.
Agreed 100%. I think part of what I do, so I'm going to be moving on to a different venture soon. I left Bitcoin Magazine, a full-time position, at the end of October. Still doing some work for them. I saw you, I think, in Amsterdam and in Abu Dhabi. I was doing the live desk there. And I love the team at Bitcoin Magazine. There's no drama or anything. I just couldn't keep up with the news cycle. To be honest, I haven't said this yet on a podcast or anything. The news cycle itself kind of feels very fiat to me. It just feels like it's meant to burn you out. I like thinking more deeply about things and investigating stories that are more interesting. So I'll continue to do media, but I'll tell stories that maybe won't get as many clicks. I mean, if you want clicks, you write the piece about Michael Saylor or the price going to the moon or the whatever. It's a little bit harder when you're touching on some of these things that are more grassroots, more nuanced. But at the same time, I feel like these stories need to be out there, because to me, they're really exciting. But also, look, like, as human beings, we we like to be recognized, right? We like that our work gets recognized. Think about all these people working around the world, all over the world, every continent, maybe aside from Antarctica, um, developing these circular economies, educating people about Bitcoin. Everyone listening to this podcast at some point or another has probably spent a little bit of time trying to teach someone about Bitcoin. They know how not only difficult it is cognitively, because we always sort of maybe struggle to find the right entry point or how to connect with that person we're speaking with, but emotionally, because I've heard this story from many, many people. Okay, so you told someone to buy Bitcoin at 90,000, then it drops to 80,000, and now that person is looking at you like, "What happened? I thought this thing was only going up. I thought this was the world's hardest money." Blah 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 blah. You know, and we could prep people. You could say, "Look, it's volatile when we compare it to fiat." Ideally, you want them to sort of think about it as an independent system. Eventually, I think people get there and don't worry about the price too much. But I remember when I first got into Bitcoin, price was a big thing for me. I was in debt. I was ideally hoping that this was going to be a bit of a financial lifeboat. So to the point I was making, I think it's really important to highlight the stories of people who are doing tremendous work on the ground, because yes, Donald Trump's, the Nayib Bukele's, the Michael Saylors, they get plenty of attention, and they get it for just reason. They are bringing Bitcoin into the mainstream. There's been a lot of very good legislation that's come from the Trump, I'll say, executive orders slash legislation. We're on the verge of market structure potentially the market structure bill potentially having some clauses in there that will protect developers, which is great, so that we don't see more Samurai Wallet and Tornado Cash cases. But at the same time, people need to be noticed. People need to be recognized. So with my next endeavor, the person who offered me the job, I was really excited to do it, but I told him as a caveat, I was like, I'm letting you know now, I'm not going to stop writing. And I'm going to bring back, I was doing a podcast specifically focused on some, Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, people doing work on the ground in these places. And I'll be doing that maybe like 2 to 4 episodes a month, but just need to sort of say like, hey, I appreciate you, appreciate what you're doing. You're doing the really hard work. It's kind of the unsexy work in Bitcoin, if you will. But it's really, really important work. And these people need to be noticed for sure.
Interesting. I smiled when you said bringing people in, and then emotionally, I'm switching more and more. If so, there's like the people that I love that I want to get into Bitcoin. With them, I will keep trying till they either don't love me anymore or I'm dead. Then there are the people that are genuinely interested in that just like come up to me and like, hey, I really want to learn. Them I explain to them. Everyone else, when someone asks me like why are you in this Bitcoin thing, I'm like, it's not for you.
That's it.
Like don't bother. Like, you're not ready for it. Like it's nothing good. Like it only goes down. And people are like, what are you? It's crazy. Like orange pilling is for me now only for people that I love and where I have a good relationship to them, or people that are coming from self-interest and really want to learn.
That's good. No, I think everybody, I mean, we don't owe it to anybody to sort of like, express everything we understand about Bitcoin or convert people, for sure. I think a lot of it ends up really does coming from love. Maybe it has changed our life for the positive, and we want other people to feel that. One of the big things that I struggle with, especially being here in New York, is I do think Bitcoin is a solution long-term to the housing crisis, to housing being expensive. I think it demonetizes housing. And I'm living here in New York with a mayor and his, I forget what the woman's name is, C.O. Weaver is her name, but she wants no more private property in New York. She wants to turn everything into a commune, and you pay 30% of whatever you make to that. I think that's a terrible idea. I don't think we should do that at all. And it's not because I'm like a super rugged capitalist. I just know that situation like that, nobody's going to take care of the facilities. I was training to be a social worker years ago. I used to go to a lot of public housing. I was working with active drug users, and it's not a pretty place, public housing. And it's not, I don't say that out of any, like, nobody should feel shame about that. It's just that there's no incentive for the people who own these buildings to keep up with them. And then nobody takes the responsibility for keeping up with them. So it's more about responsibility than it is about profits or prolonging capitalism or anything like that. So I think, it's hard because I see a lot of, especially younger people in New York, gravitating towards Mamdani, believing socialism is the only answer. When I want to sort of explain, I know that we tend to think in these binaries, you're either like a capitalist or a socialist or a Republican or a Democrat. But I think a lot of Bitcoiners, including myself, don't necessarily think in those binaries. And showing people Bitcoin, in my mind, sometimes is like showing them the third way, right? It's like this other way that we haven't considered because nothing like Bitcoin has ever existed. But, it's also hard to speak to people who have no disposable income to invest in Bitcoin. Tax structure makes it very difficult for people to accept Bitcoin as payment and then pay their taxes in dollars. So I think there's a lot of challenges. I think we need to be mindful and considerate when it comes to talking to people about Bitcoin, keep those challenges in mind. But at the same time, I still think it's worth sort of explaining to people that there is another way. But we have to sort of allow that to sink in over time. It's not going to be overnight that somebody reads like a newsletter that I write and says, oh, Frank said there's a third way. Great. I'm going to give up all my political beliefs that have been like hard coded into me for the last like 30 years. And I'm just going to pick up Bitcoin now. It just doesn't work like that. So it's going to take time for, I think, Bitcoin and some of the ideas that surround it to gain broader traction for people to really internalize them.
Yeah, voting as a Bitcoiner, I see, is hard. I mean, in the US, it's even like harder than in Europe. In Europe, like at least in Austria, there's like many parties. So there's like 5 parties that will be in the parliament that you can like choose from. But if it's only 2, like it's just like there's no party that like really speaks to you. And now with politics, I'm also like trying to figure out which one is the least worse, like which one is the one that I could live the most with, which I'm like, it's not a perfect solution, but like 50-60% of the things they're saying, I kind of tend to agree with them, but it's still like 40% I really hardly disagree with.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I had to come up with a new way to think about it because I vote on both sides, but my basic premise is I don't know who I will vote for, but I won't vote for you unless you have a clear Bitcoin policy. So meaning it's not that I will vote for your opponent. I just simply will not vote for you unless this is something that you've expressed you understand. And we have in New York, we have some Democrats that truly get it, like Richie Torres. He's great. And the other night at PubKey, I just sat down with a gentleman, Kurum Dara, who's running for New York Attorney General. So I guess the head of legal in New York. He's a Republican who's super pro Bitcoin, used to work at Coinbase, and wants to see, we have this thing in New York called the Bit license, which makes it very, very expensive because of red tape for companies to get their license to operate in New York. So for example, in New York, I can't use Swan. I can't use Strike. I can't use Lightning on Cash App. We're not allowed to use Lightning in New York if it's custodial. We can't use Kraken. So most major exchanges, huge apps, we can't use them because these companies haven't gone through what is usually a multi-million-dollar process, which also takes at least 6 months to a year to go to get this license that allows you to be essentially a money transmitter. The best part about it is you still have to get your money transmitter license in New York as well. So it's totally redundant. So we're in actually one of the worst jurisdictions in the world here. When you sign up for an exchange, sometimes it says, this is the best. It says, this exchange cannot serve residents of like Venezuela, Syria, North Korea, and New York. I couldn't make that up in a million years. It's totally true. But I was talking with Karam about that. But to my point, I'm happy to speak with people on either side of the aisle. And I think actually with Karam, I said to him, I was like, do you think the Democrat Republican tags even like, are they even what they were 20, 30 years ago? For those listening, maybe abroad, Democrat is more politically to the left, Republicans a little bit more to the right. And I asked him that for some background. I was out on like the campaign trail with Stand with Crypto in some of the, what we call swing states in the United States that might end up voting for Republicans, or they might go to Democrats, they change each election, whereas New York almost always goes to Democrats and California almost always Democrats. And then there's some states in the middle of the country that almost always go to Republicans. And I met a lot of people who I met like a 20-something-year-old Vietnamese girl who was like a recent immigrant, American girl who was a recent immigrant from Vietnam. And she's like, yeah, I'm just voting for whoever is pro crypto. And I'm saying crypto. I know this is a Bitcoin podcast, but it was a Stand With Crypto event. And she wasn't thinking along the lines of Democrat or Republican. So I think inevitably, I think that there's a little bit of there's a lot of single issue voters out there. I would say 1% to 2% of America at the very least is a single issue voter. If you don't have a clear Bitcoin/crypto policy stance, you're not getting their vote. And I think that number only increases over time. So really, really, it's interesting. And I think it's just simply going to make people do a different calculus when they vote. And I don't think most politicians are in tune with that calculus. I think Trump was, to his credit. I think he understood that the crypto voter was a bit of a silent majority in the United States. And he played to that very smartly. He played to that. But I think a lot of people are just sort of catching up with that now. But we are, traditionally it's been more Republicans that are on board, but we're even seeing more Democrats begin to come around to it. I think the governor of Virginia is a Democrat. I think it's Spamberger, her name. So there's more coming around, and ideally that's what happens. We want to see Bitcoin be nonpartisan. We want to see it be adopted ubiquitously. We want everybody to use it, which means Democrats, Republicans, political right, left, center, everybody uses it. And, but it's a slow and steady learning process for them.
You have a better overview of that, but in Europe, I hardly find anyone that is in the political sphere that even talks about Bitcoin. So like that the policy of, hey, I vote for the guy that is the most for Bitcoin, it's really hard because they all have shitty opinions. The Austrian election, I mean, I know Austria is like a small city in America, but it's my biggest reference point, and might also be representative of what's going on in Germany and like similar to a degree at least. And there I read all the different parties that have a chance to get in the parliament and what they are officially saying about Bitcoin and crypto, and it was so sad to read it. Like there was mistakes in there that were like just factually wrong. Not only just like an opinion that like, oh, I don't like deflationary things, or like I don't like Bitcoin, just like factual untrue things. And I'm like, wow, they didn't even really do a research. Then I see in America that there are mayors, there are presidents, there's like senators, there's like all of those different levels where politicians actually have, it seems like, real interest. I mean, Cynthia Lummis is like one major example that I see since years already being into Bitcoin and advocating for it since before it became popular, I guess, in America. And there's probably like a few more, like a lot more probably that I don't even know about, that are for Bitcoin, that are advocating for it in their local town, in their city, in their municipal, like whatever the jurisdiction is. Is that just in America that Bitcoin kind of reached that political level already? Do you see it somewhere in the rest of the world also, that the political engagement is so high with Bitcoin?
That's a great question. I don't know about the engagement, but I will say that governments are coming around to it. I mentioned that piece I had written on Bitcoin Dua a little bit earlier in this conversation, and I wrote that piece in the wake of Ghana passing pro-crypto, or their parliament passing pro-crypto legislation. So I don't necessarily know what the engagement looks like, meaning who is getting through to these government officials to let them know that this is important to people. But I think slowly and steadily it is happening. I think in America, there's a tradition of, we're a citizen-led government, right? I could just decide tomorrow I want to run for mayor of New York, and I can go do it. And I think that's a beautiful thing about America. There's many not beautiful things about America and parts of its history that are not whatever, but I think people raising their voices, acting, and then advocating, it's a really, really huge thing. And I think I had a pretty front row seat to it, watching the industry and everyday people alike organize and advocate for Bitcoin and broader crypto stuff. through this election, whether you like Trump or don't like Trump, it's sort of irrelevant. It's kind of the spirit of America. It really is. And not only that, like, I've told this story a few times. I have friends of mine who, they're very much not Trump people. As I said, I live in New York, which is far more of a democratic state. And I'm not going to get into my political beliefs or anything. I think they're irrelevant. But they'll be like, how could you talk to him? He's this and he's doing this. I'm like, look, I don't agree with everything Trump does. I'll quote Vivek Ramaswamy, who, is sort of part of his team. He said, like, if we agreed on everything, that would just be weird. Like, we'd be in a cult together. Like, we don't have to agree on everything. But I started a Substack. I think this March, it'll be 5 years ago, just because I wanted to teach like loved ones and friends about Bitcoin. I wrote twice a week. Now I write once a week. I've continued doing it. And 4 years later, I was in the White House talking about this stuff. That is the Bitcoin. That's the American story. That is the Bitcoiner story. It is the get up, get loud, advocate for this thing, defend this thing that you really care about. And I think, again, it's something that I don't know how much that goes on in the rest of the world. I've lived on every continent, but I don't have enough knowledge of how their political systems work. But I think at the very least, there's something deeply inspiring to seeing that. There was a moment I was at the White House for, I forget what it was called. It was the first like crypto conference. I don't know what they called it. There was a crypto summit. This was maybe early last year, maybe like March or April of last year. And I remember sitting in the room. Trump is in the middle chair. To him, you have like Commerce Secretary, Treasury Secretary, head of the SEC, head of the CFTC, blah, blah, all, government officials down the line. And to his right, Brian Armstrong, David Bailey, Michael Saylor, David, and I'm just like, whoa, like people might have issues with like private business being in the same room as government, but people came to the table. Literally, they were sitting around a table to say like, hey, this industry is really important. We've had people wrongfully going to jail for running perfectly legal businesses, and they did something about it. And I think that that's an untold story. And I get people's issues with Trump or any political and the inverse, like any political candidate. But there is something to be said about like the tenacity of just like, no, we're not allowing this thing to die. And I think a lot of us here believing, while a lot of our freedoms have been eroded in America under things like the Patriot Act and under a lot of the surveillance, stuff, that the Bank Secrecy Act, even we've lost a lot of our privacy. I think a lot of our rights, I'll say. I don't think we let them go slowly. So like, we're very much willing to fight for it. I know we're sort of loud and obnoxious and the rest of the world kind of laughs at us a little bit as we do this stuff. But at the same time, I think deep down, it sets a really important example that like, this is something we really care about and we're going to fight for. And it did reinvigorate. I think the other thing that was fun too, I used to do a weekly podcast with Julian Farr from Bitcoin Laws. Unfortunately, he had to sort of not focus on it as much, but he had this great website where he was tracking like all the laws that were moving through state, local governments, federal laws or bills that were moving through the legislative process. And as we were doing this podcast, I was like, we're like reviving civics, like learning about how a bill is made and how the government works. Like, that's a beautiful thing. Bitcoin has become a catalyst for people to want to understand how their government works, because both of us would sort of look at each other and be like, how does a bill get passed in Vermont? Like, what's the process? And we'd have to learn about it before we did the podcast that week. So I think that there's a few different tangents there, but I think there's really something to be said about standing up, speaking up for what you want, and then having to learn about a lot of stuff, which can be uncomfortable because, I mean, if I told you the amount of stuff I had to research in my previous job as a White House correspondent, you'd be like, how did anyone ever give Frank the credentials to do that? But I was willing to do it because I thought Bitcoin was important enough to fight for. And I think there's a lot of other people here who feel the same way.
The first thing that every Bitcoiner does, and the most important activity that every Bitcoiner keeps on doing, is buying Bitcoin. And I personally use Relai to buy and sometimes also spend or sell my Bitcoin. And there are two main reasons why I do so. The first one is it's Bitcoin only. They do not do any shit coins. They do not do any cryptos, any stocks, or anything else. This is a tool, an app that is fully focused only and solely on Bitcoin. The second one is self-custody. They give you the keys to your Bitcoin the moment you buy them. You never give them the control over your Bitcoin, and you don't have to trust them because you can verify that you and only you have the keys to your Bitcoin. There's no third-party risk. There's no freezing of your assets. There's no rug pulling. There's nothing of that. Download Relai, the app, on your phone, or go to relay.app on your browser and use code Robin to save fees and get cheaper Bitcoin. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. I love that. When we're done talking about the White House, I think the pardon of the potential pardon for Rodriguez and Hill for the Samurai Wallet founders is extremely important. Now, I've covered it, I think, twice now on the podcast, but not in depth yet. For the few people that haven't heard about it, maybe you can quickly summarize like what the Samurai Wallet case is all about. And then I would be really interested in how you see if Rodriguez and potentially also Hill actually get a pardon of Trump.
Yep. So I recently reached out to even though I don't do the job full time anymore, I recently reached out to the White House about this. I wrote a piece. I'll start from present and kind of work back and address some of those points you made, bring people up to speed. Actually, let me start. Samurai Wallet, for those who are unfamiliar, it's a wallet that essentially, in a non-custodial fashion, never touches the keys, mixes transactions so that there's some degree of privacy or anonymity associated with transactions. You could send transaction to someone and they can't trace it back to your UTXO. And this just is on the base layer of Bitcoin. This isn't on like Lightning or anything like that. There's one thing that often doesn't get discussed. Everybody's like, they're just in jail for writing code. They're just in jail for writing code. And that's mostly true. They were also running, I mean, Satoshi just wrote code and put it on the internet and people ran that code. They were also running a business. Should they be in jail for running that business? No. But they were running a business, and anybody who's doing money transmission, even if they're not necessarily a money transmitter, and they weren't under US law, and also guidance from our Treasury Department, 2019 guidance that said if you don't touch the private keys, then you're not a money transmitter. At the same time, it didn't help that they were like, maybe jokingly inviting criminals and other people to use their service, Russian oligarchs, whatever it was. It just brings unnecessary attention to what you're doing. But generally speaking, they should not be in jail. Ideally, they get pardoned. They were not touching user funds, so they weren't a money transmitter, and that's what they're in jail for. So broad overview right there. The thing that most people also don't understand, so we have this area of the United States called the Southern District of New York, which is about 30 minutes from where I live here in New York. It's downtown New York, and it's where most of the major financial crime cases get tried. Beyond financial crimes, it's where Epstein was tried. It's where Diddy is being tried right now. This was actually insane. I used to live in Venezuela. I went to the arraignment of Nicolas Maduro, like the actual criminal proceeding for when they took him in, when they got him from Venezuela. It was quite a surreal moment. So both Samurai and also Tornado Cash related to Samurai. I'm not going to get into the details. They're slightly different in terms of the technology, but again, a crypto mixing technology. service. With Samurai, what happened was, in my opinion, was that the powers that be wanted to essentially make an example of somebody who was creating and proliferating and even making money off of this privacy enhancing technology. There's a name for the Southern District of New York, like a more of a joking name that people have for it, called the Sovereign District of New York. Like they do whatever they want, despite what the federal government says, even though they're based in New York, but they're part of the federal government. So I think on a certain level, they got the message to make sure these guys went to jail for something. And I can even caveat that by saying, while the Tornado Cash trial was playing out, it was towards the end of that trial when it felt like the Tornado Cash, the defense in that case, was losing the case. I was in the courtroom for it. I remember walking out and then hearing that the Samurai devs had pled guilty, thinking to myself, like, what? Like the Tornado Cash guys are about to, it looks like they're about to sort of like, or guy, Roman Storm, is about to not get convicted of these things. He ended up getting convicted of 1 out of 3 charges, the least severe of the 3. And then I'm like, why would they have done that? And I actually ran into Kion Rodriguez at a coffee shop the morning before they actually did plead guilty in court. And essentially, if you go to trial in the Southern District of New York, you have a less than a 1% chance of winning as the defendant. You have literally less. It's like 99.4% prosecution rate. And then most of the time, these cases get settled out of court. So there's only like a 2% even go to court. And then if you go, you're of that 2%, only 1%. Well, I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but you have a very, very slim chance of winning. So essentially what happened was the Southern District took they were being charged with 2 things. It was money laundering and money transmission. Money laundering, you would have gone to jail for 20 years. Money transmission, max to 5 years. So they were like, look, we just felt like we were going to lose if we went to trial. The judge had a reputation for being quite harsh, not only in convictions, but also in the length of sentencing. This was the best that we could do. The issue here, again, is that we also had our Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Todd Blanche, who's second in command at the Department of Justice, who oversees the federal court system, which the Southern District is part of, issue a memo in April saying we're not going after crypto mixers anymore. We're not going after developers of non-custodial tech. We're going to go after the end users. The problem there is that going after the end users is hard, right? It's hard to go and track down everybody who's done something bad with Bitcoin who used a mixer to do it. It's much easier just to say, let's go after the people who created the technology. The problem there is just, you said you weren't going to do that, so why are you doing it? And for the record, I emailed the Department of Justice maybe every other day for 2 months, from April through June, and didn't get one response. Never got a response from them. And it was really, really disheartening because it felt a little bit like, is this just performative? Are you just issuing this memo to look good to crypto voters, to the people who supported Donald Trump, that were pro-Bitcoin, pro-crypto? And it's left me with a lot of questions around, I think, and this is a little bit tangential, but I think, there's one question that keeps ringing in my head. I did an interview with Peter von Valkenburg, who is the head of Coin Center, and they're the most long-standing crypto advocacy group, nonprofit in DC. I think he's been advocating for Bitcoin since literally 2014. And I say Bitcoin because he started out with just Bitcoin. Now he does do the broader crypto stuff, but I think deep down he's more of a Bitcoiner than anything. He said, the United States is well on its way to being the crypto capital of the world as far as like regulated, securitized versions of crypto are concerned. ETFs, and even businesses feel more comfortable operating here. Are we well on our way to becoming the P2P rights, peer-to-peer rights crypto capital of the world? I don't think so, but ideally that changes and we do become the P2P rights, which means privacy gets taken into consideration. The problem here, I'm going to try to be gentle, I guess, like without getting mad about what the powers that be have done to the Samurai developers. I think the bigger problem here that people don't often want to discuss, because they're just they're just posting like they just ran code, they just did this, which is true. But the bigger issue is like, we want Bitcoin to be used as cash, and cash is anonymous. We can use cash without our identity being tied to it. We can hand it from one person to the other without a third party being involved. It's a great thing. The only thing about cash is that it can't magically appear. It can't magically go from like New York to North Korea in a split second over the Lightning Network or over some other crypto network. And I understand why people would be concerned about that. I get that. But the problem is that nobody is addressing it with that level. I wouldn't even call that nuance. Nobody's even saying that part out loud. They're just saying, no, we can't have this. We can't have privacy. You're going to jail if you do this. You're going to trial if you do this. And we need to get past that stage of things because it's truly unfair. I've asked former regulators this. I sat down with the chair of the community, the CFTC, which is the organization that oversees commodities in the U.S. and futures. And I said, well, like when you pay me for a cup of coffee one day or pay a barista, like, do you want me to see your balance? Like, if we are moving to a world that runs on public blockchains, and again, that's Bitcoin, and maybe if you want to include stable coins in it, do you want me to see it? And he's like, no. And I said, okay, so then why wouldn't we be entitled to privacy? He said, I didn't say that. I just said, I don't think we've come up with the proper solution to that yet. Personally, I think we have. I think mixers should just be legal, and that's the end of the story. But I share that story because I think there are some people who are thinking about this. I don't think I'm going to end up liking the quote unquote solutions that they come up with, but I do think there are more people thinking about it in a nuanced way, and that we don't always get that nuance because it's one side chanting like they just wrote code, and it's the other side chanting. The other side, maybe not chanting anything, but just disallowing this to happen or not allowing it to happen. And we're missing, I think, the broader kind of more important conversation. Again, I don't know what would come out of that broader conversation, but I think it does need to be had or continue to be had. And, on the other side, I think we should just continue to advocate for privacy to the utmost. I think it's deeply important, despite the fact that bad stuff could happen with people using this technology.
Yeah, it's but also I think it's partly like the social media. Oh,
yep. Sorry about that. We're good.
Oh no worries.
Yeah. The sun is coming up in New York, so I just had to.
For me, it's not like on the highest. It's actually around. I mean, it's like totally off topic, but around 3 to 4 p.m. So in about like 1 hour, if the sun is really hot,
okay,
it gets through like a small slim here. So like sometimes you can see it actually, and I can't do anything against it. But anyways, back to the topic. What do I want to say? Oh yeah, there is something I'm really annoyed, but I'm usually only annoyed on Twitter about that. Where if there's a topic, there's two sides to it, and both are extremely extreme. And I think this is just like how modern media works, that we rush the most extreme with the least amount of nuance to the top. And so you only have the feeling that like there's only those two things. I mean, the most popular example probably of that would be oh gosh, I forgot the thing, the op return debate.
Core and knots.
Yeah, core versus knots. I even forgot the thing right now. Core versus knots was for me like so wow, like it's like it's so stupid on so many different levels.
Yes,
and there's like many of those things where of course like they're not in prison because they wrote code. Just writing code, I think nobody should go to jail. And I don't know if there's any history of ever some developer just writing code, not running it, not doing anything with that, and then going to jail. I don't think there's a as a thing for that.
Yep.
But the question really is for me is do you think, especially also with how long it took with other pardons, how long the fight was also with other cases like that, do you think there's like a realistic chance that before those, I think 5 years for Rodriguez and 4 years for Hill run out, that a pardon of Trump might actually happen?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've said this to a few people. It's the first time saying it publicly, but I think realistically, if the pardon comes, it's going to come closer to November of this year. So I say that because in the United States, we have midterm elections, and in the midterm elections, Trump could lose some of his power if more if more Republicans are voted out. He won't have as much sway to get legislation passed. So my guess is what he will do is probably I think so. The White House got back to me and said, he's very much aware of the situation. He's monitoring the situation. But I don't think he's going to use the political capital, right? So you have to think about this in two ways. It really, on a certain level, from a political angle, if he pardons them, and then Democrats look at some of the stuff the Samurai developers were saying online, it's not going to look good. It's not going to look good for like privacy. Like I get that they were being facetious and all of that stuff, but like it's not going to help the privacy argument. If they were posting about like Navalny's campaign needs to use Bitcoin, needs to use mixers, and like these activists need to use it, amen. God bless. It probably would help the movement, but Russian oligarchs and whoever else and posting on darknet marketplaces saying to use, if you're laundering money, use our site. Terrible. I'm sorry. I know people are going to get mad at me for that. Don't talk like that. I tell people this all the time. So I think what Trump is going to do is I think he understands very well that this is an important topic to the Bitcoin community, and for good reason. And I think if you see a pardon, it's going to be closer to midterms, which is towards the end of this year. I think that's your best bet, because as much as it might hurt him on the back end with Democrats saying, look who he just pardoned, blah, blah, blah. I think he knows that there's enough people in the Bitcoin space, is a non-negligible amount of people who care about this, and they're going to want to see it happen. But I think he's going to do that at a politically opportune moment. So when he needs the votes, when he needs to re-energize the Bitcoin/crypto community, he'll do it then. I don't think right now he feels that it's worth it. And nobody has told me this, don't get me wrong. I just don't, because I know he knows about it, but I don't think, and this is just the way, this isn't specific to Trump. I think this is just how political calculus works. I think he's just like, well, why would I do that right now? Democrats, I think the moment, I think it was Sander Lutz from Decrypt who asked Trump about this at that press conference. I think it was December 15th of last year. He said, and Trump said, yeah, it's on my radar. I know about Rodriguez. And, he actually said to the reporter, like, what do you think? You think I should pardon him? Which I thought was just funny. But I just think it's going to be something that he has to consider the political calculus for. But to the point I was making, Gavin Newsom, the very Democrat governor of California, posted something about the type of people Trump has pardoned, the crypto criminals, blah, blah, blah. I think Democrats are very much ready to pounce on this if he does it. And he has to factor that into his calculus. It's just a part of the equation. So if they have a chance of getting pardoned, I think you're going to see that happen, I would say, anytime between September and November of next year. I think after that, it's going to be very difficult. I wouldn't say impossible. And it'll all come down to who gets elected maybe in 2020. What are we in 2026? 2028. Ideally, it does happen before then. I would like to see it happen before then. But yeah, I don't know. But I think political calculus is something that no one is really talking about. And it's important to consider this because there's going to be blowback. There's going to be positives and negatives to pardoning both of them. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's important to know for people that a political actor has resources, and such a pardon is a resource that Trump has, and he has to be careful if the resource doesn't fire back, and he has to be, if it doesn't fire back, if it's something positive, he wants to fire the resource at the right moment, which like totally makes sense. Like it's the old saying of like, show me your incentives and I'll show you what you will do. But it's just like a side comment, especially from like a European. I love how Trump communicates. I'm a huge fan of how he speaks and how he acts. I listen to sometimes like 1-2 hour, like 1.5 hour long speeches of his, and it's just entertaining and it's understandable and it's super easy to listen to. And like the thing was, you also said, like, he's like, do you think asking the reporter, should I pardon him? You obviously think that I should pardon him, right? Otherwise you wouldn't ask a question. Like that's just, who else does that in on that high of a position? So besides his politics, absolutely, I'm a fan of how he communicates.
Yeah, he's I've been there's been a few I've been at the White House for a bunch of things that I didn't end up writing about. But he's a genius on many levels. He's very, very good at communication. And some of the genius is sort of like the Sun Tzu art of war stuff, like, hey, look over here while this goes on over here, sort of thing, which sometimes that's not so great. But there was a moment that there was a moment. It was quite a surreal moment in my life. I haven't shared this before, but I was on the back lawn of the White House, and I was just at a meeting the day before. A few months ago, there was this. It was called a harmonization meeting between the CFTC and the SEC. So the CFTC regulates commodities and futures, and the SEC regulates securities. And they were sort of talking about how they were going to harmonize regulating crypto. And I say crypto because Bitcoin falls, it's a commodity in the US, so it's not really a part of that discussion. But I go to the White House the next day, and I'm on the back lawn, and it's kind of like a movie. He flies in on like a plane. He's coming over from somewhere. His plane lands. He walks off the plane over to the press, and everybody is like ready to ask their questions. And he's like, how's everybody doing? He's like, did you guys see what I'm going to do with drug prices? I'm going to lower them by 100%, maybe 200%. I'm like, 200%? How do you lower drug prices by 200%? And he just walks away, and like the press is just like perplexed, and I'm just like, I'm trying not to. So another really funny moment. I went to the signing of the Genius Act, which was the Stablecoin Act that we passed here, and one of the first things he says, he gets on the microphone in front of this whole group of people, a bunch of Congress people, senators, people from the crypto industry. he's like, how's everybody doing? He's like, you having a nice time? He's like, if I wasn't president, half of you would be in jail right now. He's like, so let's and I'm in the back laughing. I have like another member of the press nudging me, like, you can't laugh like this. Like, you can't, like, you have to like be more, I don't know, like professional or whatever. But I'm like, this dude was born to do stand-up comedy. I wish he just chose stand-up comedy versus politics, but he is. I mean, I don't know if I said this on your show, but I interviewed him at PubKey when he came to make a payment, and one of the questions I asked him, I spoke with him for about 5 minutes in the middle of like the rest of the press being there. There was only 4 members of the press that were positioned to ask him questions, and everybody else, aside from one, just did like this terrible job. They're asking him all these high level questions. We're in a Bitcoin bar in a basement of New York. I'm like, okay, we could talk about the boring stuff later. Like, I'm going to ask him some Bitcoin stuff. And so I asked him, I'm like, what do you think about this place? You know, this is where, you know, us Bitcoin fanatics, we come and hang out. And he's like, you know what I call people like you? And in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, like, here we go. This is it. He's like, I called them crypto maniacs. I was like, this dude is trolling me in real life, and he's doing it in this like non-offensive way. So yeah, he is a funny dude. Again, it can be difficult because, again, I have all these friends that, you know, people who really have very, very strong feelings about him, but people are multifaceted. He can be really funny, and you might not agree with everything he says. So it's just sort of, he's a really enigmatic, interesting character. And straight up, he does stuff I don't like. You know, it's hard, but I can't take away his ability to communicate. As you just said, it's really, I mean, I remember when he ran against Hillary Clinton, I remember seeing some voters interviewed, and they just simply said like, oh, I don't know what she's talking about, so like, I'm voting for him. That was it. Just as simple as that. And there's a lesson in there. You know, I'm not saying that like it's good that people can't follow. I don't think what Hillary Clinton talked about was that complicated to follow, but like, it's not that it's necessarily good that people do that, but there is something to be said about the political elite speaking over the heads of everyday people who are hurting. That there definitely is something to be addressed there. And he highlights all those. It's kind of like Bitcoin in a way. You might not agree with him as the solution, but he highlights a lot of the problems. Like, Bitcoin shines a light on the problem. Like, that's kind of how he operates. But yeah, there's been a few moments that I've just not been able to keep my composure. He's a very funny dude. And he's also, I used to work for him. I used to work on his television show, The Apprentice. I used to drive the film crew. So I'd met him a bunch of times in the past while like backstage at the TV show and stuff like that. And he's a very, very engaging person. He knows, he'll ask you your name. He'll pay attention to you. He'll talk to you. He'll ask questions. He's good with all this stuff. It just doesn't often get brought up in the media because the media slants very far to the left in the United States. But I'll give credit. Bill Maher, who's a pretty liberal guy, hosts the Bill Maher show. He's like a comedian and personality. He's just like, dude, I went to the White House. I sat with this guy, and he's like one of the most fun people to be around. Like he's not the guy you see on the news and this and that. And I think half of the news stuff is that if people are always antagonistic, if the press is always just purely antagonistic with him, and sometimes they have a right to be, you're going to get antagonism back. You're not going to get this other side of someone back. So it's a certain level of like, it's interesting to see him in certain moments where he's a little more disengaged. And then I think, the other side of it is just like, there are people who are part of his team, like, who I'm just like, I wish that guy wasn't part of your team. And they're hard to defend, people who are really difficult to defend. But the thing that's interesting about him is that a lot of the stuff that people don't like about Trump, which they're very much entitled not to like, they don't like it because it all happens in the open with him. He's saying exactly what goes through his mind. He's bringing some ugly people on. You kind of know that they're ugly people. With other politicians, left or right, it's kind of like they have similar thoughts. They just don't express them. And they also bring in some other people who do pretty heinous stuff. And those people are but they just don't necessarily know they're doing it. It's kind of happening in the background. So look at even someone like Jeffrey Epstein. Politicians on the left and the right were all super close with him. And that doesn't excuse Trump or anyone else that knew him, but like Bill Clinton. I'm sorry about this. I'm passionate about this particular topic. I covered the DNC, which is the Democratic National Convention last year. I covered it for Bitcoin Magazine. I thought one of the best things the Democrats did was talk about women's rights. I believe in a women's right over her own reproductive system and all that. I believe in all that stuff with limits. You shouldn't be having an abortion 8 months into a term or something like that. Not that this is the topic of this show, but I remember going to the DNC. I was there to try to talk with anybody who would talk about Bitcoin, crypto, whatever. But I remember being like, okay, I think the best thing these women have, the Democrats have going for them is like the reproductive rights stuff. Sure, at the time, there was this thing called Project 2025 that never came to fruition, where it's like Trump's going to take away your reproductive rights and blah, blah, blah. But then, like, you have all this pro-woman stuff, which is great. And then one of your keynote speakers is Bill Clinton, a guy who's been to Jeffrey Epstein's island 24 times, who has like raped women. Like, it's just like, guys, like, we should all do a little bit of like looking internal before we judge the other person. It was just surreal and cheering for him, pumped up. And as a president, I think Bill Clinton was the best president of my lifetime. Things were good. I lived through Bill Clinton in the 90s. It was great. It was fine. As a human who's done really terrible stuff to women, not my homie, like not my dude. So it's like, it's just really, really weird. It's been weird to see this political stuff up close, especially as a Bitcoiner. I think a lot of us don't necessarily like being super engaged in politics. We do so reluctantly. But it's just been weird to see a lot of this stuff up close. And I think a lot of the Democrats there's a lot of like ivory tower, sort of like the elite degrees and speaking to the intelligentsia and all that kind of stuff. And Trump just doesn't do that. He doesn't play that game because he knows most people aren't going to follow, and most people don't want to be talked to like that. So he's a character that I just don't think he often doesn't get discussed with the proper nuance.
The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC free Bitcoin. That's why I use Simple Mining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. I 100% agree. It's also the last speech I listened to him was in Davos, and honestly, it was really fun, and was almost like the part where he talked like it hurted me, where like people like the NATO is not respecting me and like not giving enough and like all of that. I was like, oh wait, like is he getting emotional now? Like,
Right.
like it's crazy for me to see like in his position and his thing, but I think Bitcoiners really relate to that also because they are upset with the financial advisor speak.
Yep,
With
100%.
all the bank advisors, like just like putting in very complicated words to confuse you on purpose, just to like, yeah, like give me your money and I'll handle it because I know all those complicated words that don't mean anything. And I think this really speaks to Bitcoiners where we like, yeah, it doesn't have to be that complicated finance. Like we have an inflationary currency, so you lose every single year purchasing power. So put it in a hard asset that doesn't do that. And the best hard asset is Bitcoin. That's it. End of story. So we don't have to overcomplicate things with like weird words. And I mean, maybe inflation is already a difficult word, but like it really. There's a lot of people that say a lot and don't really say anything. And then you have someone that is not only saying something understandably, but also communicates in a fun and easy to listen to way. Like that's just like amazing, especially with social media. Social media gives him a huge push. Without social media, Donald Trump would never be elected, I feel like.
I think so for sure. But I'll also say one other thing. I think without Bitcoin, I don't think he would have gotten elected again. And I think that's a really interesting lesson. It was actually Jeff Booth that said that to me. I had him on a podcast I was doing, and he was just like, "There's no way he would have won without that support." I mean, he won every single swing state. Quick statistic, and I'll give credit to Coinbase for this. So if you looked at when Biden beat Trump in 2020, the vote differential in each of those states. So I'm going to try to say this correctly. It's a little complex. So like, I'll give an example of this. Like in Nevada, let's say the vote differential was 10,000 votes, like Biden won by 10,000 votes in the state of Nevada. There are 100,000 crypto owners in Nevada. In every single state that Biden won in, there were 10 times the amount of crypto holders versus the vote differential. Meaning, Trump tapped into that. He said, okay, well, I lost by 10,000 votes here, but there's 100,000 people who own crypto. That means I only need to get 11% of those people to agree with me to come on board. And he won every single swing state. I still believe crypto, and I keep saying that. I'm not advocating for crypto. It just is part of the equation here. I still believe that is what won him the election in the grand scheme of things. Because I think the Democrats, what was kind of nuts is that not only did they sort of the outright hostility to the industry is, I think, what did it. If they weren't hostile under Biden, I think a lot of people probably would have voted a different way. But what they underestimated, and this is the reason that I will never sort of either platform or vote for a politician who doesn't have a Bitcoin stance, is that we know the old system is failing. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to see that. It is failing by the day. United States debt increases by, I think, $1 trillion a year now, a few $1 billion every few months or something, $100 billion. That's unsustainable. There's no AI production that's going to outpace that. I don't care what people say. So we are moving into a different system. There are more people that understand that, if not completely cognitively, but intuitively, that feel that Bitcoin is hope. To take that hope away from them, to say, I know better. Essentially, that's what the Democrats were doing under Biden. You don't need this crypto stuff. It's all a scam. And most of it is. Don't get me wrong. Bitcoin, I would say, isn't. And if you want to make the argument for stable coins, that's fine. I'm not a big stable coin guy, but like, the people intuitively had this feeling of like, this is important to me. Whether Trump appealed to that just because he, just because he's an opportunist, which all politicians are, which all people are. So I'm not calling him a name here. Just because he's an opportunist or not, he knew that it was something that was important to people. I mean, I think you were there too. And did you watch him speak in Vegas in 2024?
Unfortunately not, but yeah, I watched him, but not in Vegas.
Okay. So like I was there. I remember watching that happen, and he would just say certain things, and like the roar, the crowd cheering, it would impact him in such a way that he would just like repeat the thing he just said, and he'd be like, "Oh shit! Like these guys are pretty pumped about this thing."
Yeah, I remember the Gary Gensler thing.
Yeah, the Gary Gensler line. Yeah, and so. I mean, I would actually argue, I don't think any political scientist would ever say this. I would argue that potentially Gary Gensler versus Trump winning it, I would say Gary Gensler may have lost the Democrats the presidential election. That doesn't get discussed enough, but I think it's a definite possibility. So yeah, it's politics are politics. There's no need. You don't have to apply like. This sounds terrible, but like you don't have to look at them through a moralistic lens. You could just look at them through an opportunistic lens and say like, look, people are going to do what they're going to do to get elected. That's how things work in this system. Bitcoin was enough of an issue that people, I mean, Trump did say things in that thing too. I will make sure you have the right to hold your private keys. There is a non-negligible segment of the US population that deeply cares about holding their private keys. I am one of them. I would never vote for someone who is that doesn't want me to have that right. Will Trump follow through on that? Will he one day take away that right? I don't know. But we have to start from a place of saying, like, I want someone that at least understands that concept. You have to believe that Kamala Harris or like a lot of her people, and there were a few good Democrats that I like. Ro Khanna. There was a guy named Wiley Nickel who was in the House who was really good, and he really understood what that meant to people. And even at the Democratic convention, they were willing to talk. But the majority didn't even understand what this meant. So there was still this air of like, the government knows what's best for you. Blah, 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 blah. Or the Elizabeth Warrens of the world that are like, we're going to get Wall Street we're going to get them. We're going to still fighting the war from 2008, 2009 during the great financial crisis. It's over, girl. Like, it is over. The U.S. debt is $38 trillion. The Fed has $9 trillion on their balance sheet. Like, people are going to lose faith in that system. Ideally, Bitcoin is ready to be there because I don't want to see people go through an immense amount of pain as one system fails. But I would already argue that they're already in that pain. The fentanyl epidemic in the United States, the hollowing out of the industrial base in the United States. I've traveled the United States many, many times. I used to be in the music business, and I used to tour with bands. I've been through the middle of this country. It's really fucking sad. I'm sorry about the language. It's really sad. There's so much devastation and poverty. And I'm not saying that Bitcoin magically fixes all that. And I'm not even saying that Trump fully means it when he speaks to those people and those people who are hurting. I think he does to some level. Can he actually fix the situation? I don't think so. I think it's bigger than what anybody can fix. It's the world has changed in ways that are really difficult. And I know they talk about, onshoring, bringing factories back to America. I'm not sure that that's going to happen. What can happen, though, as we move into an age of deflation because of AI and everything else, people can adopt this technology. And though I would have liked to seen the administration be a bit more friendly to it, I would have liked to not seen the samurai stuff happen to make sure people can use this more easily. Like I sat in the White House press room and asked Carolyn Levitt, is the president still considering a de minimis exemption so it's more easy to spend Bitcoin? And she responded to that. There is no way in hell that was happening under a Democratic administration. There would, like, if I said that to them, they would have just been like, what are you talking about? Trump himself talked about the de minimis exemption a few weeks earlier in the press room. I'm not saying that that's the only thing that people have to vote for. If you're a Bitcoiner, you can have your issues, Trump, Democrat, whatever it is. But the fact that there's someone there that at least understands these dynamics and understands why it's important to people, it for as much as I struggle with certain things that I see in politics these days, I still always say to myself, like, thank goodness we're in a place where we can at least have these conversations. I mean, I literally emailed the White House the other day saying, could you please remember to consider the pardons for these 2 Bitcoin developers? And they were like, yes, it's on the president's radar. What? Like, what? Like, it's like we sometimes lose sight of that. I think it's really, really important. And it's not that other issues that people don't like about Trump aren't important as well. I just think it's, there is some leverage here. We have made progress, and ideally, I just want to see Bitcoin normalized. I know the association with Trump will not do that for certain people, but on a certain level, I think once people just start to use it, get their hands on it, understand what it is, I think that's the beginning of it to becoming more ubiquitous, to people using it without thinking about it the same way they do with the internet. I'm sorry, I didn't plan to go on these rants, so my apologies.
I absolutely love it, and I just wanna point out, like, every time I speak with you, I get to know another job you had in the past. It's crazy for me, of like the apprenticeship, the virus correspondence, the music industry. I think the first time you went on, we talked about something you did in the financial crisis that was very tied to it. I'm not sure if I remember that correctly, but it's so interesting. Like you had, I think there could be an interesting episode just walking through your like CV and seeing what you have done. It's that experience really shines through, I think.
I appreciate it. Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit off camera too. I think it's one of the reasons I gravitated towards Bitcoin, and I'm interested in a lot of different things. When I was I mentioned earlier, I was training to be a social worker. I care, and this is also why I like covering what's happening in places where people are unbanked or financially disenfranchised. But I care. I want people to win. I want people to win. Ultimately, Bitcoin, I think, is a great tool for them to win with, or to use to win. At the same time as I was doing my my master's in social work, I was also doing my master's in business and my MBA. And I say, if I was probably the only person in New York City doing those 2 degrees concurrently, and almost like, I actually dropped out of both of them, which is funny because they just didn't move at the pace that I'm an autodidact. I like to learn on my own. They just weren't moving at a pace that felt good. And I didn't really agree with everything that was being said, or I didn't agree with a lot of things being said in both programs. But I think we talked about this a little bit, and I would love to just have you chime in with this. I think with Bitcoin, especially if you're a content creator, you feel like you need to be pigeonholed. And I get why. I felt that as the White House correspondent, that people were maybe looking at my Twitter feed thinking like, okay, well, Frank is the person talking to people in the White House or to lawyers or to whatever regulatory issue is going on right now, so I'm going to go to him. And I tried to sort of do that. But again, it felt a little bit tough because I had all these other interests. I'm interested in paying attention to how, I don't know, Bitcoin is interfacing with traditional finance world. I'm interested in the grassroots stuff that I talked about earlier. And I think oftentimes we think we sort of have to be, I don't know, a little bit more focused on what it is, just in the way that we present ourselves to the Bitcoin community. But I was curious if you could touch on this too. I think it's interesting to say, like, you, and not only what you bring to the table because of your past experiences, but you've had hundreds of conversations with prominent Bitcoiners. You've learned so much, and on a certain level, I think someone said to you, like, what kind of panel should we put Robin on at a conference? And you're like, dude, you can put me on any panel. Like, I've had all these conversations, whatever. So I'm curious, do you have any advice based on your experience to other people out there who are making content? Should people sort of just continue to follow everything they're interested in with, or how do you sort of hone it in to make it work for what you do as the host of this podcast and the show that you do?
Oh gosh, I could go on for with that for like 2 hours because of a lot of thoughts on content creation and on finding your way and finding your voice in a system. And I think I'm a kind of good example for that. I'm not a Jack Mallers or Michael Saylor or anything like that, so I'm not the best example for that. But I have reached some kind of like status in the community, and so when you see what I did before that, before Bitcoin, before Twitter, before a podcast, not really anything. I was like a sales manager, I was just like a guy that was working in IT security in a corporate job. Nothing spectacular, nothing interesting. I didn't had any fame or any particular wealth that was really in any experience really interesting. So I came very young to this game, and I came very blank to this game. People did not know who I am and all of those things. And so I think for people that get started, it's an interesting example because it kind of shows that you don't need to have really anything. People think like, oh, if I start a podcast, I need to be this guy, or I need to be the... No, the podcast can allow you to become this guy, or writing a blog can allow you to become this guy. And I think Joe Rogan might be actually like a really good example of that, where he started with something, with this UFC fighting, but at some point it's got to be a little bit more. He talked now about aliens also, and then there's like politicians on his show, and then there's like his way of like thinking about COVID, and like there's like all those different elements all of a sudden coming to him that make Joe Rogan and an interesting person. It's more than just fighting or the comedian stuff I completely forgot. There's like many more facets of Joe Rogan that make Joe Rogan, because this mixture of things make him interesting. But it's very hard to start with that. It's very hard to like just shine in like many different areas and combine that and be like the Renaissance man. And this is kind of what I'm trying to do this year, actually, of combining all the different elements that I've learned and combining in something like more concrete. But starting out, it's so much easier if you have a very clear topic, focus on that topic. And once you reach like some mass there, then like you can add things in there, and you can add things in there. I mean, Peter McCormack also like does that now a little bit. Like he's the Bitcoiner, but now he also talks about politics and helping the UK and like doing the football club. So he's kind of also in that development where he gets from Bitcoin to politics to football club and gets like to be a person that's not just about Bitcoin. And he started as I'm not an expert on his history, but I think he started with just Bitcoin. And so long story short, if you're just starting out and you are like blank like me in the beginning, and just like an average dude that is like whatever age old, it's probably best to focus on something. Probably best to like pick one thing. But don't be afraid to go out of that. Don't be afraid to like also, you can have like 80% Bitcoin stuff, and then you drop something about your favorite football club, or you drop something about like your cousin told you something that really resonated with you, had nothing to do with Bitcoin whatsoever, or you talk about parenting, or like whatever the hell you want to talk about, you put that in there, and you might actually end up having another topic that might actually be like bigger than Bitcoin at some point for you personally. And so I'm not there yet. Like I'm mostly talking about Bitcoin. The podcast is a nice format because it's a conversation, and there's naturally things coming out that are not just Bitcoin. If you're doing like writing an article, it might be more difficult. If you have like short YouTube videos with like 15-20 minutes, it's like harder to do. But all that to say, and I think that's the point also you're trying to get to, is having more than just one thing is what makes you you. That's the thing that makes you as a person complete and good, and makes you like the person that you are, that makes Robin and Frank and Joe Rogan. So or Michael Saylor. That's the unique thing. And so it's always so easy to say like be authentic and you will be successful online. It's not as easy as it sounds. Like you have to like, there's a lot of strategic thinking around that. Like how do you actually get out there and how do you get people to click on your stuff and read your stuff? Because if you put stuff out there and nobody reads it, like also like and it's also not that good. So this is just like high level how I think about that. I don't know if this was helpful at all for you.
Super helpful. One question, also a follow-up. I was just down in Colombia, Bitcoin Medellin conference, and I had a lot of conversations with people about, I would say, like periphery topics with Bitcoin. So people in Bitcoin like to talk about health. Maybe they're against seed oils or they like red meat or whatever it is. Or but then there was another guy who did this amazing talk on the frequency of Bitcoin. So like there's different frequencies associated with different states of being and emotion. So like anger, shame, all this kind of stuff. These are lower frequencies. And then when we get above courage, love, joy, unconditional love, these are higher frequencies. And there's a book called Power versus Force that quantifies all these frequencies and talks about how to sort of like get the higher frequencies and blah, blah, blah. And this guy gave this talk, one of my favorite talks ever on Bitcoin, the frequency of Bitcoin. And it's like the frequency wavelength that it's on is like it's unconditional love. It's similar to the feeling of unconditional love. And he gave this whole talk about how Bitcoin will then transform the world and it'll heighten people's consciousness. About like, is it all true? Like factual? I don't know. It is what it is. But what it made me realize is like, what I think we need to do is like, I think there's going to be more Bitcoin media now. That's periphery. It's not just going to be podcasts where we talk about the fact that there are 21 million Bitcoin and that it can be used permissionlessly. It's good to do that because there's always new people coming to it and we need to remind them of those things or teach them about those things. But I think now what we're doing, like I did a show called Bitcoin Politics and this other show called Capital Gains, where we were learning about civics, how a bill gets made, how that relates to Bitcoin. It's like Bitcoin will be the base layer. It'll sort of be like you come to this podcast because you know that the guy is a Bitcoiner or the woman hosting it or they are a Bitcoiner. But then you're kind of staying because they're also talking about this periphery topic or this other topic that maybe Bitcoiners are into. Maybe you're introducing it to Bitcoiners, spirituality, diet, fitness, whatever it is. I think we're going to move into a space where Bitcoin media becomes broader, where it's there, like it's something that gets talked about, but you're watching like a Bitcoiner talk about a different topic. Do you feel like we're on the verge of something like this? I think you're doing that with your show to some degree, if I'm not mistaken.
This show started as the Bitcoin Path and was called the Bitcoin Path for the first 2 or 3 episodes, okay. Not very long. And then very early on, like literally the first 3 episodes, now we are like over 700 episodes, I came to the feeling that I might like doing that so much that I might never stop it. And I'm very sure that with 60 years old, I have a different topic than with 40 years old and have a different topic than now with like 27 years old. And so I was trying to pivot away from the Bitcoin path and thinking about a name that fits with Bitcoin, but has like a bigger, can fit more things in there. And I tried it so hard for one day, then I was like, the only name for the podcast that can fit everything that I will do in my life in there is my own name. Like that's literally it's also you can say out of laziness and all of that, but it's literally that thinking of, I don't know what I will be talking about in 20 years. But I know I already have that place with the Robin Seyr podcast where I can talk about that stuff. And so how do I call it? My name is the only thing that really binds me to all those things. It's very much Bitcoin focused, but if you analyze the topics, and I do analyze the transcripts with AI and see like what's the split, well, like what are we talking about? Mm-hmm. The split of non-Bitcoin topics that are discussed by Bitcoiners have maybe something to do with Bitcoin, because everything has something to do with Bitcoin, is getting bigger and bigger, just because the basics of Bitcoin getting boring. Now there's this also bad feeling inside of me of like, there might be a Bitcoiner in the making that is his first 1 or 2 videos seeing this podcast, and then he's like, oh, that's too high level and all of that. I don't know, maybe I'm just not serving that audience, and I'm okay with that. But I have constantly people coming up to me like, hey, your podcast took me down a rabbit hole. And so like when I talk to people that are new to Bitcoin and watch my podcast, it's usually like, oh, I got orange pilled, or like the interest got awakened by something else. And then your podcast was kind of number 2 to take me down there. Just like the interest came somewhere else, but it's like you got into the door of Bitcoin and the podcast was kind of the elevator down or up, whatever you want to focus on. So I'm fine with that, and I think the worldview of like having a Bitcoiner talk about something is a lot more interesting, because there's this concept of the Bitcoiners are very disagreeable people, and they like to look at, is it really like that? Is it really like that? They don't trust things. And if I have to trust a person, I want that person to be as disagreeable as possible because he most likely did research. And so if a Bitcoiner talks about health and nutrition, I'm more likely to believe him than if he is against Bitcoin. Because I'm like, okay, if you're against Bitcoin, I'm not sure if you have done your research on Bitcoin. So how can I be sure that you have done your research on that other topic? So that's why I do like that. I think you called it Renaissance Man before we started podcasting.
Yeah, I used to do a show called New Renaissance Capital, because I think there's 2 things about that. So one, I think Bitcoin does bring in autodidacts, people who like to learn on their own and at their own pace, but also who are just generally interested in a range of topics, whether it's computer science, math, economics, finance, whatever it is. But the other side to it too is I think that the sort of people who are interested in all these topics, you kind of have to be interested and have an understanding of these things to be a leader in your community, or to be a leader in general, or a thought leader, whatever it is. So there's this idea of like, we have sort of a renaissance developing around Bitcoin. So it's bringing Renaissance people, men, women, to this place because they're interested in all these. Bitcoin is a multidisciplinary thing. But then also ideally, so like in Florence before the Renaissance in Italy, you had the florin, which was the hardest money ever created, I think, up until that point. And so money sort of becomes the base layer for a society that flourishes. I think Saifedean writes about this, and I agree. Maybe not to the extent that he goes off on like what Bitcoin will create in the world. It'll bring back Renaissance art. I don't know if that'll happen. Maybe it will. But I think that there is some level to like, you do need it. It brings people with this multidisciplinary set in, but it also sort of births people. Like you said, you come to it with who you are. Maybe you didn't even have a ton of experience. You didn't even have the time to be multidisciplinary, but you become multidisciplinary as a result of it as well. And that's a really special thing. And I think the thing, to your point also, is like the trust element of like Bitcoin being adversarial thinkers, and therefore they've thought through things and all the things that could go wrong or blah, blah, blah. That's one element. But then the other side is like, you also know that this is a person who's just willing to do their homework. Forget about whether you trust them or not. They're just willing to read. And I think that there's also, I gave my talk in Colombia about this the other week. There's also, I think, the Bitcoiner who's sort of just like here repeating the sayings, fix the money, fix the world, blah, 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 like, and I think that that's a little bit of like a defensive measure. When you don't exactly know what you want to say, you rely a little bit more on sort of the rhetoric from the space. But when you meet Bitcoiners who are afraid to maybe even disagree with some of that rhetoric, or like offer some nuance on it, but also who just have very unique things to say and bring to the situation, it's usually a really special conversation, because this person is like well-studied, open-minded. They probably have a bit of a reduced ego. They were willing to unlearn a lot of the things that they have learned so that they can make space to learn new things. So you sort of know that the conversation is primed to be something interesting. And I think that's part of the reason when we start branching out into other topics, whatever those topics might be now in Bitcoin media, I just think those conversations will be something that we all enjoy a little bit more, because they're they're being had amongst people who are just, I think even just the open-mindedness part, forget about level of intelligence, IQ or anything like that, just being open-minded and just willing to accept a different reality. Also, I would call it courage, right? Most of us talk about, you mentioned it earlier, you talk about Bitcoin and certain people in your life just recoil, like, how dare you, you're a scammer. We've all been through that. That takes a lot to hear over and over and just be like, and not only, I used to be antagonistic. I used to get really, really mad and defensive when people did that. Not really, but I would get frustrated. It takes a lot of like egolessness to just simply say, as you said earlier, it's like, maybe this isn't for you right now. Like Bitcoin just isn't for you. Like it's just not your thing. And I think that's humility, that level of humility, egolessness. That's really important. Also, that also tends to make for a good conversation or just, an interesting person to speak with. So I think all of these things are now starting to become a little bit more apparent to myself or people like you who have had hundreds of conversations with Bitcoin enthusiasts. And I think naturally it's also important to follow your curiosity. So if you're just reciting Bitcoin, there's 21 million censorship resistance, blah, 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 the audience is going to feel that you're not that enthused about that. And I think Peter McCormack got to that point. He was just like, look, this is not my thing anymore. I think what we need to understand is not all of us need to do everything. There are going to be some other people out there who just got into Bitcoin that want to teach everybody the basics. That's the role they're meant to play. Probably similar to you when you started out doing this podcast and you were maybe highlighting some of those more basic things about Bitcoin. I think about this a lot because I also write under my name from my newsletter, just frankcorva.substack or whatever it is. And I'm always like, yeah, well, what if someone finds this thing and they don't have enough of a framework to sort of understand where I'm at? I'm like, it's not really my responsibility to worry about that because the newsletter will be so boring if I'm not interested in writing about what I'm writing about. Everybody is at a different level with this. We need everybody from like the humble Bitcoin pleb who's teaching the basics to the Adam Backs of the world who are creating the technology that's, or the people who are furthering the technology who probably you or I couldn't follow in a conversation. You need that whole spectrum of people who are doing things on multiple levels, super technical to super fundamental. So I think it's just a matter of like, continue to follow your curiosity, continue to pursue Bitcoin and topics around Bitcoin as they resonate with you, because with all this kind of stuff, you're building an audience, you're building a tribe sort of thing. And you want to attract people that are on a similar sort of wavelength and that are sort of at a similar point in the process as you are, because again, otherwise you just sort of become, I don't know, a faceless kind of cardboard cutout, cheerleading Bitcoin if you're not actually getting into things, talking about them with passion, and I think even sometimes just hearing the passion in your voice or hearing the interest or the curiosity, that alone sometimes brings people in and makes them want to go down the rabbit hole, because they might not understand everything you're talking about, but they might kind of think like, this guy's on to something. And that alone might be the thing that sparks them or pushes them to go a little bit further on their journey.
And I see it actually on the back end because like every podcast is the same with me. It's like I'm the host and there's a different guest. And so if you have everything is the same except the guest, you see nice data around the guest where some of the guests get average view durations of like 15, 16 minutes on YouTube, which is like kind of normal. Okay. And then there are some that get 10 minutes and then there's some that get like 25 minutes. And it's like, oh, wow. Yeah. Like I'm always the same. Maybe I have like better days and worse days, obviously. Like I'm a human being, I'm not a robot. But like there are, and we all kind of say the same thing, like Bitcoin good.
Yeah.
And have different stories around that and maybe explain different things around that. But there are clearly people that have their own thoughts. They are very passionate about things and they speak it in also like, just like are better speakers. Like there's a technique to speaking. And they are just better in this and more passionate about this or thinking more their own thoughts on this. And then there's like people that maybe just say the same things. Now there's also a topical thing. For example, Bitcoin mining, I just know is not as popular with people than when we talk about other things. Just as there's like topics that are just like very hard to make interesting. But in general, you see like how well someone is passionate about it, or like how good someone is about speaking the topic, or how deep his thoughts are, just like on the viewer duration, how long they are sticking around, because the viewer can feel passion and can feel the thing. So the same thing will happen today. We're already 10 minutes over time. I hope I don't block you in any other meetings today. So sorry for that if I keep you for something else.
We in person and on these podcasts, we tend to talk like this. And ideally, hopefully that resonates with the audience. I'm sorry if I kept you too long or if I make your editing harder. So my apologies on that front for sure.
One more question before we get to the end routine of the podcast. Yep. Do you think, because that's my not a concern, it's just like something I've witnessed, because the Bitcoin culture is changing obviously every single year a little bit. Do you think that like critical thinking, the thing that we just said, like you're very disagreeable people, is now also slowly changing just because Bitcoin is also way more mainstream now? So now you don't have to you don't have to fear that you are being called a scammer if you bring up Bitcoin, because it's kind of hard to say Bitcoin is a scam if the president is talking about it, if like those companies are adopting it and all of that. And so now like the next wave of Bitcoiners that come in like 2006, 2007, 2008 might not be as disagreeable as like someone from 2012 or something like that, and change like what a Bitcoiner really is.
Amazing question. I'll answer this quickly in the spirit of not taking up too much more of your time. There's a lens through which I view this. So I was involved in the underground punk and hardcore scene in Long Island and New York City. So for people who don't know that, that's like loud, fast music with guitars and blah, 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 like, you know, all this stuff. But like the popular bands, I don't even know if people know like the Ramones anymore, or like that was early punk in the 70s. But there was still a large wave, especially of hardcore music. Trying to think of like bands that people might know. I don't know. I don't want to say certain things because I'm going to sound really old, but I got into this in the 90s before internet was really a thing. And it was very DIY. It felt to me the exact same way Bitcoin did in the early days. And I wasn't even around in the early days of Bitcoin. If we look at it over a 17-year horizon, I got in about halfway through that 8 or 9 years ago. But there was a much more of like a DIY. You had to learn it. People were very, very passionate about like censorship resistant money, separate money from the state, blah, 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 blah. Now you have the state talking about it. Now you have Wall Street talking about it. You know, it's a much different thing. Will Bitcoiners become less adversarial, less sort of, I think the bigger question is like, I want to see as many people as possible running nodes and really understanding the technology on some level. And I'm a little bit nervous that, especially as we get more paper Bitcoin products, whether it's the ETFs or treasury companies, which I'm not inherently against, I just hope that people also spend at least some time going down the rabbit hole, because you're going to need passionate people to really carry forward what Bitcoin is, the spirit of what Bitcoin is. But even you're going to need technical people to come to it to continue to build on things, to continue to work on whatever Bitcoin implementation you run, to build products. So to your point, I think, yes, there's going to be more of a mainstream vibe coming in the same way I saw these like punk bands turn into like Blink 182 or like, you know, like these other bands that were more palatable. I see the same thing kind of happening with Bitcoin. We're moving into like, it's just mainstream. It's less taboo, which is good. I think deep down, we want that if we just want this thing to be everyday money. But at the same time, there's a lot about the Bitcoin ethos that we want to see live. We want people to believe in self-sovereignty, in the freedom to transact, all of these things. And I think on a certain level, you know, as people who really believe in that, it's up to us to continue to talk about those things and to educate people as to why they're important and to take a stand on some of those issues. But I would say we're surely at risk of, I wouldn't say losing it, but I think the biggest thing that would end up hurting Bitcoin in the end is complacency and just saying like, oh, somebody else can go mine it or run the nodes or do this or blah, blah, blah. And I get with nodes, there's economic nodes, and some nodes have sort of a different level of sway on the network. But learning as much of the self-sovereignty stack as possible self-custody, run a node, verify your own transactions, all that kind of stuff is really, really important. And it will be lost if we don't carry that spirit forward. So while we can sort of also branch out into other topics, I think also having Bitcoin at the core of a lot of conversations we had and encouraging people to be as self-sovereign as possible is going to be the thing that keeps it alive, because BlackRock is not going to do that. We know Michael Saylor is not encouraging people to like go out and run nodes or whatever. No shade on either of them. It's just sort of like that's not their mission, right? They're doing something totally different. So if some of the biggest names in the space aren't doing it, it's still going to be up to us on the grassroots level to be educating people about why that's important. And ideally, we carry that spirit forward by doing so.
It would be so freaking cool on a strategy earnings call if Saylor says like run your own node. I will pay money for seeing that. Like that would be fucking awesome.
It would be great.
And I love that you mentioned it, because I also think if Bitcoin fails ever, which I don't think it will, but if Bitcoin fails ever, it will not be because of a technical error. It will be a social one. It will be something with the human psyche. We have an end routine, as you might know from the previous experiences, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest is. And the previous guest was a psychotherapist. And so he asked, what was an early childhood experience that you can remember that shaped you to be a Bitcoiner today?
Oof. I would say very much just two different. I'm going to shout out two people. I always gravitated towards my father's spirit. My father was an entrepreneur and a doer, loved starting businesses, considered the community and who was going to be involved, and very much kind of like a Bitcoiner in spirit. He unfortunately passed only a few years into Bitcoin's existence. I didn't know what Bitcoin was at that point. But his entrepreneurial spirit, and then also I always gravitated towards an aunt of mine. My aunt was a nun that actually worked with the Sandinistas when they overthrew the Nicaraguan government in the 1970s. She was there while it happened. And politics aside, in college, I was doing some work. And I'm saying not that college is when I fully got who she was, but I found out that safe houses for women in Nicaragua were called Peggy's. They named them after my aunt because of how much good work she had done on the ground, helping women in the country. And so I was always, as a child, I always just like gravitated to her goodness. So I tried to, with Bitcoin, I feel like you can have that spirit of my father, the entrepreneurial, call it even capitalistic spirit, also a very good person, but also this humanitarian, caring about other human beings. Bitcoin is one of the few places, we have like the Human Rights Foundation, right, where these things get married. And so I think that without even really, those are the two things that come to mind, just gravitating very much to my father's spirit and to my aunt's spirit. And when I found Bitcoin, it was the first place where I ever reconciled those two things. It was like, no, you could be both of those things. You can be entrepreneurial, but also be a humanitarian. And it's what I love about this space the most, I think.
I love that answer. Really, really cool. Thank you so much, Frank, for being on the podcast, being so gracious with your time and with your stories that you share with us. Before I let you go, where can people find you and find more about you?
Yeah. One, thank you for having me. Sincerely appreciate it, Robin. Always a pleasure to speak with you both in person and here. To find me on X, just my name at Frank Corva. I think if you put my name into any of the Nostr clients at this point, maybe start with Primal or Damus if you're not using Nostr, but please find me on Nostr. I'm trying to spend a little bit more time there. I really, really like Nostr. If you're not familiar with it, please begin your journey down the Nostr rabbit hole. Censorship resistant social media, that's one way to put it. And then if you want to subscribe, I write a newsletter each week, just sort of recapping my week in Bitcoin, just frankcorva.substack.com or substack.frankcorva, whichever it is. Those are probably, or LinkedIn, you could just type in my name. Any of those places is where I share most of my work.
Nostr, the purple bill. And
that's
we
right.
have to take in there. Thank you so much, Frank, for being on the podcast. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.